There has been a draw for the late debate tonight. The successful winner was the member for Sackville-Cobequid. Therefore, be resolved that in light of the recommendation of HRSB staff and external consultants retained to undertake the MHR schools consultation process, recognize the rapid population growth in the Eastern Passage area and the solid community support for a high school to provide safe and efficient access to education for their children. This legislature endorses the construction of a high school in Eastern Passage area. We'll commence with the daily routine. Presenting and reading of petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the programs and services provided in our communities and in our correctional facilities by correctional services, probation officers, youth workers, correctional workers, support staff, and managers contribute to just and safe communities in Nova Scotia, and whereas correctional services works cooperatively with other departments of government and many individuals and organizations, including district health authorities, other law enforcement agencies, volunteers, and non-government agencies to provide correctional programs and services, and whereas the work of all those who provide correctional programs and services deserves the respect, appreciation, and recognition of this House and all Nova Scotians, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House support the proclamation of May 4th to May 10th, 2008 as Correctional Services Week in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Department of Agriculture supported the first Agriculture Literacy Day in Nova Scotia this spring by having farmers and others with an agriculture connection read books about agriculture to students in the classroom, and whereas more than 20 schools across the province participated in this initiative, which provided an opportunity for children in grades 2 and 3 to connect the food they eat with where it comes from and the people who grow it. And whereas agriculture plays an important role in the economy of the province, and Agriculture Literacy Day may help our children make healthier food choices and spark an interest in farming as a career choice. Mr. Speaker, therefore be it resolved that all members of this legislature congratulate Department of Agriculture staff and the Nova Scotia Agriculture Awareness Committee for organizing this initiative and encourage more schools and farmers to participate in this event in 2009. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas May 5th to 11th is Mental Health Week across Canada, and whereas 1 in 5 Canadians are affected by mental illness in their lifetimes, and most Nova Scotians will be indirectly affected by mental illness through relationship with friends, family members, and co-workers. And whereas each year the Canadian Mental Health Association provides direct service to more than 100,000 Canadians through the combined efforts of more than 10,000 volunteers and staff in locally run organizations in all provinces and territories, and branches in more than 135 communities. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize May 5th to 11th as Mental Health Week and acknowledge the work done by those individuals working either in our hospitals or in our community mental health clinics in this province to provide care for those with mental health problems and emotional disorders. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the province of Nova Scotia has over 7,600 kilometres of coastline, which are vital to the prosperity and the rich fabric of our province, and whereas the Coastal Communities Network, a volunteer association of organizations whose mission is to provide a forum to encourage dialogue, share information, and create strategies and actions that promote the survival and the development of Nova Scotia's coastal and rural communities, recently launched their Close to the Coast website, a significant resource that makes valuable information accessible to recreational boaters and visitors to our province. And whereas the Coastal Communities Network's goal is of keeping the community socially, economically, and environmentally sustainable by building stronger communities and strong opportunities by connecting people, organizations, and governments. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this legislature congratulates the Coastal Communities Network on their recent launch of their website, Close to the Coast. Thanks to their work, a successful, sustainable future is bound to be the catch of the day in coastal and rural Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Mr. Speaker, the pages are passing out a CD on the website for every available to every member of the House. So.
Here, good minister.
The Honourable the Acting Minister of the Public Service Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas administrative professionals perform a vital role in managing today's office, mastering office technology, managing information, and organizing the business of an office. Whereas the International Association of Administrative Professionals 2008 Canada Divisions Conference will take place in Halifax from May the 22nd to the 24th. And whereas the host, Halifax Dartmouth Chapter, provides administrative professionals with education, networking opportunities, certification, and other career-enhancing programs while also advancing the image of the profession. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize the outstanding administrative professionals within the public service and the business community and wish them well during their upcoming conference. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas for nearly 40 years the province has enjoyed a strong partnership with Ducks Unlimited Canada, and whereas during that time Ducks Unlimited and its partners have invested more than $30 million towards waterfowl and wetlands conservation in Nova Scotia, and whereas Ducks Unlimited has undertaken more than 340 projects on 16,800 hectares of our province's land, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Ducks Unlimited for the significant ecological successes they have achieved and show our continued support for the Wetlands for Tomorrow Habitat Partnership legacy. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Pendleton Place Winter Shelter, a seasonal 20-bed shelter providing warm, safe overnight accommodation for men and women over 16 years of age who are not able to access other shelters in HRM, and whereas Pendleton Place opened on November 1st, 2007 for its fourth consecutive winter and closed effective May 1st, 2008, whereas the Department of Community Services was proud to contribute $244,471 grant funding in 07-08, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate the St. Leonard's Society of Nova Scotia and the staff of the Department of Community Services transient team for their positive partnership in addressing case planning for individuals requiring alternative shelter options upon closure of the shelter, as well as for contributing to a positive community partnership amongst all shelters which provide service to the homeless population. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Labour and Workforce Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Department of Labour and Workforce Development ensures that high-quality skilled trades training is available to employers and apprentices in Nova Scotia, and whereas skilled tradespeople are essential to the strength and growth of our province's businesses and its economy, and whereas the Department of Labour and Workforce Development provided 839 new apprentices with a certificate of qualification for a designated trade in 2007-08. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate these Nova Scotians and recognise all our partners, including the Nova Scotia Community College, the Nova Scotia Apprentice Board, industry associations, and the many employers who hire and mentor apprentices for the work they're doing to help keep our economy strong. I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? The motion is carried. Introduction of bills. Notices of motion. The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Paul Withers is a senior member of the Legislative Press Gallery and one of the most widely recognized and respected reporters on Nova Scotia public issues. And whereas this month Paul Withers won the Atlantic Journalism Award for continuing coverage on television of a 2007 news story, and whereas Paul Withers was the only member of our Legislative Press Gallery to win an Atlantic Journalism Award this year, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Paul Withers on winning an Atlantic Journalism Award and recognize the important role that he and his colleagues play in our democratic society. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Jimmy Donato, a Sydney bodybuilder, has won the Nova Scotia Bodybuilding and Fitness Championships, and whereas the competition took place this past April at the Rebecca Cohn Auditorium in Halifax, and whereas by winning at the provincial level, Mr. Donato has earned the right to compete in the 2008 Canadian Bodybuilding Championships, which will be held in Montreal later this year. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly congratulate Jimmy Donato on his accomplishments in bodybuilding and wish him success in future competitions. I'd ask for waiver, Mr.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? The motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Hants West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas it was a hot mid-July this Saturday in 1987 when Richard Dauphiney won a seat on West Hants Municipal Council for the 3 Mile Plains area. And whereas Warden Dauphiney, better known to many as Richard, defeated 2 other opponents
Order,
that
please.
day.
Order. I'm having a great deal of difficulty hearing the member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Defeated 2 other opponents that day and won the by-election to fill the seat vacated upon the death of the late Fred Blinkhorn in April of 1987. And whereas Richard Dauphiney was honored with a certificate marking his 20 years of service as municipal councillor and warden late last year by Premier Rodney MacDonald, and will begin serving his 21st year on West Hants Municipal Council this July. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House applaud the passion and commitment of West Hants Warden Richard Dauphiney for his tireless work and faithful service to the residents of 3 Mile Plains and to the municipality of West Hants. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? The motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the annual Duke of Edinburgh's Award are presented to young people between the ages of 14 and 25 years of age who have successfully completed the Young Canadians Challenge. And whereas the Young Canadians Challenge is a program requiring participation in community volunteer service, enhancement in fitness and life skills levels, leading to the successful completion of an adventurous journey. And whereas this year the prestigious Duke of Edinburgh Bronze Award was presented to 18-year-old Marc-Andre Desires from Cole Harbour for his effort, time, and commitment to leadership development and community volunteerism. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly commend Marc-Andre Desires for his achievement of having successfully completed the Young Canadians Challenge program and congratulate him for receiving the Duke of Edinburgh Bronze Award for his accomplishment. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas it is estimated that 1 in every 3,600 children born in Canada has cystic fibrosis, the most common fatal genetic disease affecting young Canadians. Whereas approximately 3,500 children, adolescents, and adults with cystic fibrosis attend specialized cystic fibrosis clinics throughout Canada. Whereas the Canadian Cystic Fibrosis Foundation is a Canada-wide health charity with more than 50 volunteer chapters which fund cystic fibrosis research and care. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize May as Cystic Fibrosis Awareness Month and acknowledge the persistent efforts of the Canadian Cystic Fibrosis Foundation in trying to find a cure. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 14-year-old Stellar native Riley Peacock is one of 2 Pictou County teens who traveled to Ottawa earlier this year for the 10th Annual Town Youth Participation Strategies National Conference. Whereas Ms. Peacock traveled with Program Coordinator Paul Corbin, who claimed that it was an excellent opportunity for all of them as they hope to bring back new ideas for the Stellarton Youth Centre. Whereas the conference allowed Mr. Corbin and his representatives to meet those involved with youth centres from across the country in an effort to avoid complacency, ensuring that the centre offers Stellarton's youth all that it wants and needs. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Riley Peacock and Paul Corbin on their attendance at the Town Youth Participation Strategies Conference in Ottawa this year, taking the opportunity to build such an important element of small town life in Nova Scotia into the best it can be. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Operation Peace started in 2004, when several grade 5 students at Hawthorne School in Dartmouth wanted to make a difference in the world, and whereas the current 3 clubs have raised and contributed $10,000 to an orphanage in Santa Cruz, Bolivia, and whereas the 19 grade 1 to grade 8 members hosted another fundraising dinner and show April 5th, raising awareness of the impacts of poverty and bottled water and the need for fair trade. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the members and facilitators of Dartmouth's Operation Peace Clubs for their ongoing fundraising to support children in Santa Cruz, Bolivia, and thank them for their caring and contributions of time, energy, and talents. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? The motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in recent years, Andrew Stickings, a grade 5 teacher at Grosvenor Wentworth Park School, has integrated filmmaking into the curriculum to expand learning opportunities for his students. And whereas this year, Andrew's students made local history come alive with their film production of Look What's in Our Backyard, which will be entered in this year's Viewfinder Challenge. And whereas the film is about the 1700s and the Duke of Kent's strong historical connection to Princess Lodge and Hemlock Ravine Park. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly congratulate Andrew Stickings for his creative teaching style and for opening the minds of his students. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Northeast Highlands Chamber of Commerce of Victoria County was incorporated in 1996 in anticipation of attracting more winter tourists to the local area, and whereas the Northeast Highlands Chamber of Commerce now boasts around 60 members and has formulated an articulate product development and marketing campaign in support of local business, and whereas the 2008 Chamber Executive is led by President Sam McPhee, First Vice President Judith Hussey, Second Vice President Colleen Dunphy, Secretary-Treasurer Jill Humphreys, and past President Ian Green, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly commend the exceptional work undertaken by the Executive and all members of this Chamber of Commerce as it continues to work hard for the prosperity of the business community in the Northeast Highlands of Victoria County. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the idealism in young people who want to get involved can change the world for the better. And whereas Youth Challenge International's Project Tanzania will provide assistance to Tanzanians afflicted with AIDS. And whereas Ms. Megan Polachuk of 9 Mile River was chosen from a large number of applicants to represent Canada. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate Megan Polachuk on her selection as Youth Challenge International's Canadian representative on Project Tanzania and wish her well in her mission to Africa. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the Member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas healthcare in Nova Scotia now consumes 43.5% of program spending, and whereas recent CRA polling has shown that healthcare still remains the #1 issue in Nova Scotia, which points to both its importance and impact on the residents of this province. And whereas emergency room closures, the chronic shortage of healthcare professionals, and the growing challenges facing the acute care sector due to ongoing pressures on the continuing care sector are but a few of the issues that require specific examination. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia House of Assembly support the immediate creation of a standing committee on health.
The motion is tabled. The Honourable the Minister of Health.
If I may do this one in French, Monsieur le Président, je vous indique par la présente intervention que je soumettrai prochainement à l'Assemblée l'adoption de la résolution suivante. Attendu qu'en 2008, la Semaine nationale des bénévoles a été déclarée entre le 27 avril et le 1er mai 2008, et attendu que la 34e cérémonie provinciale annuelle des bénévoles a été tenue à l'hôtel Westin le 24 avril, et a été honoré plus de 70 bénévoles venant de communautés diverses à travers la Nouvelle-Écosse. Attendu que Stan Surrett de Pimlico West a été choisi comme représentant de la municipalité d'Argyle comme bénévole provincial de l'année et est très impliqué dans la communauté acadienne en tant que président de la Société Promotion pour Grand Prix, président du comité consultatif pour le ministre des Affaires acadiennes, ainsi que d'autres associations plus profondément sont dévouées continuellement au sport, politique, communauté chrétienne et la promotion de la langue et de la culture française. Il est donc résolu que tous les membres de cette Assemblée se joignent à moi pour féliciter M. Stan Surrett ainsi que tous les autres bénévoles de la province qui sacrifient leur temps à leur communauté. Monsieur le Président, je demande à l'Assemblée de bien vouloir renoncer à l'avis préalable et procéder à l'adoption de cette résolution sans débat. If I can do that in English just for others.
Please do.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice in future days to move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 2008 National Volunteer Week was proclaimed between April 27th to May 1st, 2008, and whereas the 34th Annual Provincial Volunteer Awards Ceremony was held at the Westin on April 24th, honoring more than 70 volunteers from communities throughout Nova Scotia, and whereas Stan Surrett of West Pimlico was chosen to represent the municipality of Argyle as the Provincial Volunteer of the Year and has been active in the Acadian community, serving as president of the Société Promotion Grand Prix, president of the Advisory Committee for the Minister of Acadian Affairs, and many other associations, least of all his continuous involvement with sports, politics, Christian community, and the promotion of the French language and culture. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House join me in congratulating Stan Surrett and all of our volunteers throughout the province who spend countless hours dedicated to the service of their communities. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying we. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Pictou West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas brothers Chad and Tyrell Murray of Meadowville, Pictou County are young farmers that are in the process of establishing a certified organic farm, and whereas in their first season last year they harvested vegetables from their greenhouse and from 3 acres of garden, selling them at farmers markets in Antigonish and Halifax, and whereas Chad and Tyrell have a strong interest in environmental issues and farming organically, and a strong belief in producing our own food locally. Therefore, be it resolved, this House of Assembly commend Chad and Tyrell Murray in their efforts to establish a certified organic farm and wish them every success. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas local real estate agents from Exit Realty Town and Country have worked diligently to improve the community in which they operate their business and live, and whereas on March 29, 2008, they went door to door throughout the community and gathered over 2,000 pounds of food for the Upper Room Food Bank Association, and whereas the time, considerable effort that it has taken to collect this donation will go towards the nutritional needs of 110 families in Kingston and the surrounding area. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House congratulate the real estate agents from Exit Realty Town and Country on their successful food drive and thank them for their ongoing commitment to their community. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall ask for the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Super Cities Walk is the MS Society's largest pledge-based fundraiser, involving over 70,000 participants and volunteers in more than 160 communities across Canada, raising more than $13.2 million, the proceeds of which fund research in the search for a cure and vital services for people currently living with MS. And whereas on May the 4th, 2008, the Walk for Multiple Sclerosis was held in Halifax with hundreds of participants taking to the streets in support of the MS Society in search for a cure for the most common neurological disease affecting young adults between the ages of 15 to 40. And whereas Shauna McKinnon of Sun Radio 96.5, a local figure who in her daily life wrestles with this debilitating disease, an individual, like many, who publicly tell their stories of living with MS in hope that one day soon we will find a cure. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulates all those who took a step to defeat MS for friends and loved ones in the MS Walk and support the efforts of Shauna McKinnon of Bedford and others with multiple sclerosis in raising awareness of living with this disease. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Halifax City.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Keith McMillan, Ben McDade, and Matt Campbell are student athletes at St. Mary's and Dalhousie University, and whereas Keith McMillan and members of the St. Mary's men's and women's soccer team are donating 100% of the profit from the Camp of Champions soccer camp held on April 26th and April 27th to build a field for children in Lashane, Tanzania, and whereas Ben McDade and Matt Campbell are organizing a dryland training program for young hockey players this summer and will donate 10% of their profits to the Children's Wish Foundation, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Keith McMillan, Ben McDade, and Matt Campbell and other student athletes who are making an important contribution to their community and to the young athletes who will benefit from their efforts. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Alliant Pioneer Volunteers is the largest corporate-based volunteer organization with close to 9,000 members contributing 165,000 volunteer hours each year, and whereas the main goal for the Alliant Pioneer Volunteers is to improve literacy rates throughout Atlantic Canada, and whereas recently the Alliant Pioneer Volunteers launched a new multimedia education program, Power Up to Read, during National Volunteer Week, therefore be resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize the many efforts of the Alliant Pioneer Volunteers in promoting literacy in our region. Mr. Speaker, I would ask waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 2007 Truro Midget AA Bearcats completed an undefeated season in Nova Scotia, compiling a 20-0 record under the direction of Coach Phil Lyons. Whereas the Bearcat members, Nick Carroll, Brett Lather, and Mike Townsend were at the top of the league scoring list. Whereas team goalies Jesse Cox and James MacArthur led the league with 9 combined shutout games. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize all players and coaches of the Truro Midget AAA Bearcats and congratulate the team on their outstanding season. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate. I will table it.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas it is very important that seniors continue to live independently in their own homes and age in a place of dignity. And whereas a very generous donation was made to the Victorian Order of Nurses, Queens County branch to enable them to expand the Seniors Assisted Transportation Program into communities in North Queens. And whereas this volunteer-based program ensures seniors are able to travel to medical appointments, banks and pharmacies, and take care of essential errands, including grocery shopping. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognize Mrs. Eleanor Seeley of Hunts Point for her generous donation to the VON of stocks valued at approximately $100,000. The interest earned annually from this gift will contribute to the continuing independence of many seniors. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the band Taylor Express is making its mark on the music scene of southwestern Nova Scotia with the release of their first CD entitled Going Home. And whereas the band consisting of Reg Taylor, Nancy Wright, Brenda Dossett, and Ken Saunier play songs which encompass country, gospel, bluegrass, and Cajun. And whereas this group of musicians also play numerous fundraisers, festivals, events throughout the Maritimes, and promoting their many talents. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the House of Assembly recognize the accomplishment of Taylor Express and wish them the very best in the future. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Victoria the Lakes on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to introduce a group of individuals who are up in the gallery this afternoon. They had the wonderful opportunity to attend an IHF hockey game at the Metro Centre last evening, and they're here today to tour the legislature and view the proceedings of the House. They are members of the Bay St. Lawrence Community Centre and the Northern Victoria Community Centre, minor ice and road hockey youth participants, and I would ask them all to stand and receive the warm welcome of the House.
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas a quartet of Pictou County performers has earmarked a portion of their CD proceeds to breast cancer research and allergy awareness, and whereas a quartet named Intervision that began 7 years ago after meeting at a church-sponsored choral workshop, and whereas guitarist Ray Stewart wrote 3 original compositions on the CD, with one being about his granddaughter Jada, called Jada's Lullaby, who was also the granddaughter of Cumberland South constituents John and Darlene Harone of Parsboro. Therefore, it be resolved all members of this House recognize the efforts of Inner Circle in using their gifts and hard work to combat breast cancer, raise awareness about allergies and other charitable causes through their inspirational music. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and pass without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 2008 Healthy Living Calendar of the Halifax Regional School Board, supported by NHL star Sidney Crosby of Cole Harbour, features students' drawings. Whereas Brian Monroe's drawing of Eat Well, Get Well was featured for the month of March, and whereas Brian Monroe is a grade 6 student at Tantown Elementary School, therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Brian Monroe on his contribution to the Halifax Regional School Board's 2008 Healthy Living Calendar. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of debate and passage, or waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Labour and Workforce Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Annapolis Valley School Board promotes peace in the classroom, and this year the theme for Education Week was Partners for Peace, from classroom to community. And whereas Bev Roy, a teacher at the Northeast King's Education Centre, was recognised for long-time involvement in the area of peaceful schools. And whereas Ms. Roy has initiated programs for parents and teachers that has involved several schools. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Bev Roy on her accomplishments in the area of peaceful schools and her efforts with youth. I request waiver of notice and passage without debate. Sure, go ahead. Do you think it's
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Donald Dion, a musician from the newly formed band Recycles of Shelburne County, volunteered his musical talent to perform at the Barrington Municipal High School for the Food for Shelburne County fundraiser on February the 23rd, 2008. Whereas $2,000 was raised and distributed towards all 3 Shelburne County food banks, and whereas each month 40,000 individuals are assisted by the food banks in Nova Scotia, on which 1/3 represents hungry children and 9.4% represents the working poor in our province. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly thank Donald Dion for volunteering his musical talents to perform at the Barrington Municipal High School for the Food for Shelburne County fundraiser on February the 23rd, 2008. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I will move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Canada's Outstanding Young Farmers Program Atlantic Region recognition event was held March 14, 2008, to honour the accomplishments of young farmers throughout the area. And whereas Wayne and Nicole Olton of Martock Glen Farms are the 2008 Atlantic winners in recognition of work that they have done to build a family farm along with their commitment to the slow food movement. And whereas the Oltons are both active supporters of the 4-H program and have worked with a variety of agricultural organizations to build their industry, therefore, be it resolved that members of this legislature congratulate Wayne and Nicole Olton for receiving this year's Young Farmers Award and wish them continued success in their future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and ask for passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 9 Nova Scotia 4-H members will represent the province at national and international conferences in Ottawa and Maryland in March and April, and whereas Caitlin Conlon of Great Village has been selected as one of the delegates from Nova Scotia to participate in this event designed to increase awareness and understanding of the rights and responsibilities of Canadian citizens, and whereas Caitlin will join 9 other Canadian delegates at the U.S. National 4-H Conference in Maryland. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of this House congratulate Caitlin Conlon on this excellent opportunity to further learn and explore how national and international issues affect their communities. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Eastern Passage Cow Bay Summer Carnival has been held annually for the past 32 years, and whereas many hardworking and dedicated individuals give up their time each year to organize these events, and whereas the Eastern Passage Cow Bay Summer Carnival brings the community together for fun, games, and activities, and also offers many community groups the opportunities to fundraise for their organizations, Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly commend all the volunteers of the Eastern Passage Cow Bay Summer Carnival Committee and all the groups and organizations involved for their hard work and dedication helping to make the 32nd Annual Eastern Passage Cow Bay Summer Carnival a success and wish them continued success for years to come. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the MLA for Lunenburg, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Brandon Russell Legacy Association has been created in memory of Brandon Russell of Pinehurst, Nova Scotia, to help Lunenburg County families who have children that are receiving cancer treatment. Whereas the first fundraiser for the Brandon Russell Legacy Association was held at the New Germany Rural High School on March 22, 2008, with about 500 people in attendance. Whereas the event raised $7,000, which will help many county families whose children in their fight against cancer. And therefore be resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate the Brandon Russell Legacy Association on their very successful first fundraiser and on their efforts to help the families of children who are suffering from cancer. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate. I got to fix it.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. There's been a request to revert to the order of tabling bills. Is it agreed? We've got both. Is it agreed? The Honourable, the member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce an act to amend Chapter 4 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Gaming Control Act.
The Honourable member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 4 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Gaming Control Act.
Bill 158, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 4 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Gaming Control Act.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable the member for Cape Breton South.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is on a petition, Mr. Speaker.
Ask for permission.
I'd ask for permission to revert to the order of business.
Revert the business of the day to tabling petitions. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Mr. Speaker, today I'm pleased to introduce a petition signed by 16 residents of Midgley Drive in Westmount, Cape Breton, regarding some traffic problems they're having on their street. And I've informed the minister of the problem, and he certainly agreed to have a discussion with me over this problem, so I'd like to table this petition today. So,
have you fixed your name?
Thank you.
Thank you. The petition is tabled. Orders of the day. Time is 12:53. We shall go on until 1:53. The Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My first question today will be through you to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, the Offshore Revenue Accord enshrined the key goal of John Ham's campaign for fairness, and that was that Nova Scotia should receive all federal revenue from our offshore oil and gas, regardless of the changes in equalization. That principle was affirmed unanimously by this House, and then, Mr. Speaker, it was sold down the river by this Premier after the federal Conservatives unilaterally cancelled the Offshore Accord. In light, Mr. Speaker, of the most recent forecast that Ontario will soon qualify for equalization payments and thereby reducing revenue to Nova Scotia, my question through you to the Premier is this: why did the Premier welcome a bad deal that is expected to leave even more of our offshore revenue in Ottawa's hands?
The Honourable, the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, through you to the Honourable, my honourable colleague, nothing could be further from the truth, Mr. Speaker. And perhaps, Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague, should do a little bit more research in this regard. I know they're having problems with regards to research in the last few weeks, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the fact is, Mr. Speaker, equalization, Mr. Speaker, the equalization formula, either the previous equalization formula or the new O'Brien formula, is impacted by what's happening across the country, including Ontario, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague is wrong in his assertions. It's a good deal we got for Nova Scotia, and Nova Scotia remains the full beneficiary of the offshore.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The most recent special report by TD Economics is not the first time that anyone suggested that Ontario would become a have-not province. It was forecast in 2005 by the Ontario Chambers of Commerce. It was discussed by major economists as a real possibility before and after the 2007 federal budget. Despite the uncertainty of equalization revenues, the Premier caved in to Stephen Harper and agreed to a bad deal. This Premier's deal forces Nova Scotia to choose between a 50% clawback and a now diminishing equalization pool, and neither, Mr. Speaker, is a good choice. So my question to the Premier is this: how much is Nova Scotia going to lose because he sold out John Ham's legacy to the province?
Hear, hear. The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, through you to the Leader of the Opposition, he is wrong, Mr. Speaker. Nova Scotia got a good deal. We will remain the primary beneficiary of the offshore, and included in that, Mr. Speaker, this government will help solve over a 20-year issue on the Crown share, something which that side of the House is against, something which this side stands for, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that Nova Scotians truly get the full beneficiary of our offshore.
The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the Premier's imagination is getting the best of him. Mr. Speaker, Wade Locke, an economist at Memorial University, and as the Premier knows, an expert on equalization, has stated that when Ontario joins the have-nots, the equalization pool will be, and I quote, unambiguously smaller and a lot smaller. And for this smaller pool, Mr. Speaker, the Premier sold out the Atlantic Accord that was strongly supported by every party in this House. Well, my question, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier is, will the Premier ever stand up for Nova Scotia? Will he ever campaign for fairness in the way that Dr. Ham and Premier Williams stood up to defend their provinces?
The Honourable the Premier.
While that side of the House criticized the former Premier of this province, this side of the House stood up and got the Atlantic Accord, Mr. Speaker. While that side of the House criticized this government moving forward for the Crown share, this side of the House is solving the problem. While that side of the House is not worried about the future of this province, this side of the House is worried about the future of this province.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party. The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party.
I want to begin by thanking the Leader of the Opposition for firing up the Premier as we get started here. So my question is for the Premier. We now know that the offshore deal our Premier accepted is the same one that he earlier rejected because it was not good enough for Nova Scotians. For months he said he would not settle for less than the original accord, but he did. He settled for less, Mr. Speaker, and now we know that the value of the deal is shrinking. So my question for the Premier is, why did you accept the deal that affords the people of this province less than we were entitled to under the original accord?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, through you to my honourable colleague, and my honourable colleague is indeed wrong in his assertions, Mr. Speaker. This government signed a very good deal for Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. This agreement will ensure that we remain the primary beneficiary, the full beneficiary, Mr. Speaker, of the offshore, Mr. Speaker. It will also see this province receive the Crown share, Mr. Speaker. I am shocked, Mr. Speaker, that both parties in the opposition are against Nova Scotians receiving the Crown share, Mr. Speaker. But we will see the details of that come out in the weeks ahead, hopefully, Mr. Speaker, and that will be very good news for Nova Scotians, Mr.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the grey economy forecast on the horizon for Ontario, our province's share of equalization may become significantly smaller. The Premier abandoned the hard-fought Atlantic Accord for a deal that is an integral part of the equalization system. If Ontario becomes a have-not province, as projected, it will take a big bite out of the equalization pie, leaving less for Nova Scotia. So my question to the Premier is, how can the Premier defend a deal that undermines the ability of his government to provide the services Nova Scotia expect and deserve?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, it is always a concern for me as Premier, Mr. Speaker, and our government, and I think for all Nova Scotians and all Canadians, when the economy in Ontario is not doing as well as we would all hope. Mr. Speaker, does that affect equalization? Well, of course it does, Mr. Speaker, and that would have impacted the old formula as it does the new one. And, Mr. Speaker, that is clear and open to everyone, Mr. Speaker. But the fact remains, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia has an opportunity on the choice between what is happening, and we have protection in that regard, and that is a very good thing for our province going forward. We will see the benefits of this over the course of the next 12 years, Mr. Speaker, and that is very good news for Nova Scotia.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've all heard the phrase short-term pain for long-term gain. However, our Premier has settled for more in the short term, leaving much, much less in the longer term. It sounds to me like short-term political gain. So my final question to the Premier is, why did you buy into a deal that will see this province receive less support than we were entitled to under the Atlantic Accord?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague is wrong, Mr. Speaker. This province will see full benefits of the offshore, Mr. Speaker. That is the aspect, the clear aspect of the clarification agreement, which we announced last fall. And to suggest otherwise, Mr. Speaker, is not providing all the appropriate information to the people of our province. And, Mr. Speaker, we intend to make sure that that appropriate information moves forward with respect to the Crown share at the time we get that information. And, Mr. Speaker, a Crown share agreement, which will be very good news for the people of our province. And I hope, Mr. Speaker, at that time, both my honourable colleagues on the opposite side will finally, Mr. Speaker, stand up and say this is good news for Nova Scotia and a good deal signed by this government.
The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, my question will be for the Premier. When the Premier was first elected in 1999, his government promised it would never use public money to back enterprises that would compete with our existing private businesses. When it comes to major government initiatives like the Atlantic Gateway, the province has to get consensus on gateway priorities from all the players. So my question to the Premier is this: with whom did he consult before drawing up the gateway wish list he announced to the Chambers of Commerce on March 5th?
Good question. The Honourable the Premier.
Speaker, I'll refer that to the Minister responsible for Atlantic Gateway.
The Honourable the Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And with respect to the Gateway, we're actively involved in consultation with many parties, Mr. Speaker, who have a stake in the Gateway, and that, of course, includes many people located in the various ports of this province and the airport, Mr. Speaker, and we're in continuous contact with all of those bodies.
The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, to the Premier. Orion Cold Storage is an impressive locally owned business in the Woodside Industrial Park. They opened in 2006. In fact, Orion says that they have the newest and most energy-efficient cold storage building in North America. And I've been there, Mr. Speaker, and they're handling lobster, blueberries, steak, all kinds of local foods. 43,000 square feet of them, just 20 minutes from the airport, and they haven't taken a cent of public money. Mr. Premier, my question to the Premier is this: when you announced your Atlantic Gateway wish list, you included a new cold storage facility at the airport. Orion has been blindsided by that announcement, so I ask you, why did you not consult with a major business stakeholder before you made the Gateway announcement?
The Honourable the Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And what the announcement that was made by the Premier was an indication of what facilities are required in order for the Gateway to be effective within this province, Mr. Speaker. And certainly any existing businesses that are there that fit that bill, Mr. Speaker, could indeed may very well become a very important part of that strategy.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition, on his final supplementary.
Well, that's very interesting, Mr. Speaker. Orion and the other existing cold storage operations in Metro are currently only running at about 40% of capacity. Orion doesn't think there's a business case for adding more. So my question to the Premier is this: what steps are you going to take to make sure you consult properly with the business community before you come up with proposals that are going to have a direct effect on their bottom line?
The Honourable, the Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as the potential of the Gateway unfolds for all businesses in this province, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that we will come to a much greater understanding of what potential exists within the existing business community, and we will continue to respond to opportunities that are presented by businesses and ensure that they become part of the future relative to the Gateway, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition, on a new question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it is a new question indeed, and I'll try a new minister, if you don't mind, the Minister of Health. The intensive care unit in Amherst closed down this week because of an ongoing dispute between internists and this government. The minister told us last week that internal medicine was under control, but that's far from the truth, isn't it? In fact, the situation is getting much worse in rural Nova Scotia, so my question for the minister is this: will the minister table the deal with internists that he believes resolves the problems in the ICUs?
Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I can say that I'm very disappointed with the actions of these three doctors. There was a deal that was drawn up between Doctors Nova Scotia, our department, and of course the Cumberland Health Authority, to meet the issues that they had brought forward to us. Those doctors did not accept the deal as it was placed before them. They were still dissatisfied and did not accept the interim arrangement. Mr. Speaker, I can say that the new master agreement with physicians is one that is being shared with doctors across this province right now, and I will share it with this House once that has been ratified by the doctors.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition, on his first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, everyone knows that internal medicine is the heart of a functional hospital. Without internists, the whole system really falls apart. Last October, the minister announced he had resolved an ongoing dispute with Doctors Nova Scotia. He said his agreement would ensure continuing ICU coverage. We now know that is not the case. So my question for the minister is this: what is the minister doing now that he knows that there is very little intensive care coverage in northern Nova Scotia?
The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I can say again that through some pretty heated discussions, some negotiations that went on between Cumberland Health Authority with the Doctors Nova Scotia, who is the bargain agent on behalf of physicians in this province, that a interim deal was drawn up in order to get us forward to the master agreement. That was not accepted by those doctors. And Mr. Speaker, we look forward to them accepting the larger deal, which is the new master agreement that's being put forward to physicians today.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition, on his final supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, in the meantime, the only fully functional hospital between the New Brunswick border and Antigonish is the Colchester Regional Hospital. That hospital has only, it should be Halifax, I guess. The hospital has only 2 full-time internists and 1 temporary specialist. The combined ICU-CCU runs at or near full capacity, and accepting transfers would be a challenge. So my question to the minister is this: how long does the minister think that internists at that hospital will last before there is a complete collapse of intensive care in northern Nova Scotia?
The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to commend the work done by the Cumberland Health Authority. One, that they worked very hard to try to find a resolution to this issue. One, that they were not able to come to a final agreement with those physicians. Again, I am disappointed with the action of those physicians and only working the smaller one.
Mr. Speaker, I can also say that through this new master agreement that we are hoping, Doctors Nova Scotia has assured us as well, that this will make a broad difference to the ICUs in this province. Mr. Speaker, I can also say that we're very happy that Pictou County will be coming back online in about 2 days on May 8th, where they have found a wonderful solution for that hospital to provide ICU coverage.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. Last week, New Brunswick raised the price of gasoline by 2 cents a litre. Here in Nova Scotia, our minister lowered the price of gas by 3 cents a litre. The difference in price between the two provinces is now 5 cents a litre because of our high taxes, Mr. Speaker. But many Nova Scotians are wondering, why was there an 8 to 10 cent difference for the past month? So my question to the Premier is simple. Why have you inflated the price of gas for Nova Scotians over the last month?
The Honourable, the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the regulation is meant to ensure that, Mr. Speaker, that people have stability with respect to buying their gas, and also the protection of our small rural stations, Mr. Speaker. And on both fronts, it is working in this province.
Hear, hear. The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many Nova Scotians are left to wonder whether there's political interference in the price of gas. Nova Scotians are suspicious when they face anywhere from 7 to 10 cents per litre difference when the legislature doesn't sit. And when the legislature does sit, the difference magically comes down to 5 cents a litre. Nova Scotians do not want their government to play games with the price of gas in this province or with their pocketbooks. So my question to the Premier is...
Order, please. Order. The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party is trying to ask a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So my question to the Premier is, why is that today the difference in the price of gas between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia is our higher taxes, and for the past month you have made Nova Scotians pay well above that difference?
The Honourable, the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, in the response to the initial question, the Premier explained what regulation was intended to do here in Nova Scotia, and it indeed has done that. You found that the rate of closures of rural stations has really slowed down compared to our neighbouring province. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, that is done by formula, and there is some differences in the formula in New Brunswick and the formula that's used in Nova Scotia. I think I'm glad to see that the Leader of the Liberal Party did acknowledge that last week the price in Nova Scotia did go down while the price in Nova Scotia did rise.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party and his final supplementary.
That's why I asked the Premier, because he's not even sure which province he's in, Mr. Speaker. And he's the guy setting the price of gas here in Nova Scotia. And he knows that rural gas stations are closing in this province, and the fact that Nova Scotian consumers are paying more than they are in New Brunswick because you've inflated the price of gas in the province of Nova Scotia. Get it out of your department if you believe in regulation and put it in front of the URB. There isn't one single Nova Scotian who believes that regulation has been a benefit to them.
Do you have a question?
You've been taking money out of the pockets of Nova Scotia.
Do you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My final question to the Premier is, no one wants regulation. Not even your entire cabinet believes in regulation. The only ones that believe in it are some on your side of the House and the Democratic Party. Mr. Speaker, when are you going to admit that this policy has been a failure for the people of Nova Scotia and our economy?
The Honourable, the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations, and I would really like to hear the answer. Order, please. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very disappointed in the Leader of the Liberal Party that he would stand up and defame the public service in this province through those comments. And, Mr. Speaker, he knows not what he is speaking of.
The Honourable, the Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health. It was with great relief and to my surprise, I might add, that this government made the last-minute decision to fund Avastin this year. But it was with great dismay that we find once again that there is no plan in place for those people who are paying out of their own pocket for the drug that should have already been on the provincial pharmacare list. So I'd like to ask the Minister, Can the minister tell me exactly what his plans are for funding Avastin so cancer patients won't be stuck with a bill while they wait for the Department of Health's clarifications?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Ultimately, once we've made the decision, now that we've made the decision to fund Avastin, of course it is privy to the approval of a budget. Mr. Speaker, we have to make sure that the guidelines are available and ready once that budget is approved. Those guidelines are being developed right now by our cancer division, the oncology division of the usage of Avastin, and it is my estimation that they will all be ready together.
The Honourable the Member for Sackville-Cobequid on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, as the minister knows, people treated for colorectal cancer need Avastin treatments every 2 weeks. Some patients' costs will exceed $3,000 a month. Marlene George of Halfway Cove in Guysborough County is scheduled to have a treatment tomorrow. So I'd like to ask the minister, will Marlene have to pay for this drug out of her own pocket, or will the government do the right thing and start paying for Avastin as of today?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Again, there are some clinical guidelines that need to go along with the usage of a drug like Avastin. We're making sure that those things are ready to be able to fund that drug as soon as possible.
The Honourable the Member for Sackville-Cobequid on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, a new drug can be added to the provincial list at any time. For example, last July, this minister added 2 new cancer drugs to the provincial list. So I'd like to ask the minister, why doesn't this minister do the right thing and put Avastin on the provincial list effective immediately?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And this minister did do the right thing, and it now is on our provincial formulary.
The Honourable the Member for Sackville-Cobequid on a new question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the minister. For nearly 15 years, people in the Annapolis area could use an economical shuttle service to travel to Kentville and Halifax for hospital appointments. This service was funded by the local hospital foundation and through the donations of the passengers. That affordable service is ending, Mr. Speaker. So I'd like to ask the minister, what is his department doing to ensure patients from the Valley can attend hospital appointments in a reliable and economical way?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And of course, in this year's budget, there was $3 million available for accessible transportation for the province, and I'm sure there are a number of organizations that can access those dollars. Mr. Speaker, I can also say there is a wonderful transit system in the Valley that stretches from, I believe, Windsor all the way down to Weymouth, which includes the town of Annapolis.
The Honourable the Member for Sackville-Cobequid on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, quality health care is available to all Nova Scotians, but for rural patients it comes at a high cost. The new fee schedule for the Annapolis Valley Shuttle Service to Halifax is $85 and $45 to Kentville. Some seniors, like Valerie Youngmont of Deep Brook, says it's too expensive and she just can't afford taking the bus. So I'd like to ask the minister, how can you expect seniors to get quality health care when they can't afford to take the bus to get to their medical appointments?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I know there are many ways for individuals to get funding for this type of transportation. Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to do the best that we possibly can with the dollars we have. Mr. Speaker, if the member opposite would like to provide me with some information, I'd be more than happy to look into this case for him.
The Honourable the Member for Sackville-Cobequid on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's plan for rural health care is to consolidate services in major centres to save money. But this transformation just transfers the cost of health care to those who can at least afford it, Mr. Speaker. Transportation is the key to health care delivery, yet this minister seems to be washing his hands of the issue. So I'd like to ask the minister, why has this government chosen to neglect health care needs of rural Nova Scotia?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, once again, the NDP are not doing their research. They're not paying attention to the recommendations held in the transformation document that we put forward. The recommendations of the Corpus Sanchez report, which talks about developing a rural health strategy. In my mind, a rural health strategy means consulting with real Nova Scotians on their issues and developing a plan that is going to better meet their needs. Mr. Speaker, this government is about consultation, one about working with Nova Scotians, not just coming up with airy-fairy ideas.
The Honourable, the member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians want to know that their communities are safe. They want to know that they can walk around and enjoy their neighbourhoods without the fear of violent criminal activity. However, violent crime in our capital city is getting increasingly worse. A week cannot go by without reading of a violent crime here in the Halifax Regional Municipality. So my question to the Premier is, if you're getting so tough on crime, why does the situation keep getting worse in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable, the Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and to my honourable colleagues and all members of the House. Indeed, there is an instance, and we're all concerned about violent crimes on the increase, but we've also seen our government's commitment to make sure we're providing the appropriate tools to our law enforcement officials, and we're seeing also good news in our papers because our tough on crime agenda, our boots to the streets efforts are producing the results and providing Nova Scotians with the confidence they require and deserve.
The Honourable, the member for Richmond on his first supplementary.
Well, Speaker, the Minister of Justice failed to talk about the wrongful releases of inmates in Nova Scotia, the inmates who are still on the loose here in Nova Scotia, and he failed to mention that. Mr. Speaker, Money Sense magazine conducted an annual survey of 104 Canadian cities on the best places to live in Canada. Last year, Halifax was ranked number 2. This year, Halifax was ranked number 9. The author of the report made this comment, quote, "The crime rate was the single biggest factor for sure. Out of 154 communities, Halifax was ranked 125th for crime," end quote. Mr. Speaker, this certainly does not sound like a situation that is getting any better. So my question is, what explanation can the Premier give for the fact that crime continues to be on the rise here in Nova Scotia under his administration?
The Honourable, the Minister of Justice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I can say, you know, I know that there are issues of concern, and after now 4.5, almost 5 hours of question period, we finally get to such a pressing matter. And Mr. Speaker, I would say it has not been something that I've been waiting to address. We're working with our partners. That's why we're working with the HRM, the Mayor in his roundtable on violence. That's why we're providing resources to our police. That's why we're working with the Government of Canada to provide more tools that we need to address the issues here, rather than just saying the sky is falling. I thought it might have been earlier with those statements. In fact, Mr. Speaker, we're rising people up and providing capacity that they require to get the job done, and that's provide a safer and secure Nova Scotia.
The Honourable, the member for Richmond on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this is the Minister of Justice who was on his spring tour around the province while inmates are escaping in Nova Scotia and dangerous criminals who had been picked up by the police are escaping custody under this minister's watch. Mr. Speaker, this is the minister that refuses to allow correctional officers to use the tools necessary to ensure their safety and the safety of Nova Scotians when they're doing inmate transfers. Mr. Speaker, all we keep hearing about is rhetoric. More police officers. Now we know that those police officers will have to be used for inmate transfers rather than putting the boots to the street, as the minister would say. So my final question is, when will the Premier of this province stand up and finally provide a plan that makes our streets safer rather than just continued Tory political rhetoric?
The Honourable, the Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I can say through you to all members of this House, to the honourable member, when you look at our Safer Streets and Neighbourhoods Act, when you look at what's happening to make sure that the neighbourhoods are safer, and the Nova Scotians say, yes, this government is responding and is dealing with that, Mr. Speaker, we are dealing with the issues before us, and I've made very clear when we have to address issues, if there are problems, we're dealing with them head on with our external audit, Mr. Speaker. And you know, the honourable member for Richmond would talk about me touring this province. Yes, we are doing that, engaging Nova Scotians. And he got up and said, Mr. Speaker, in debate, you know, well, the government is saying we're victims of our own success. Well, Mr. Speaker, I will never get up and accuse the Liberals of being victims of their own success in this province.
The Honourable, the member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Order. Order, please. Order. Order, please. The Honourable, the member for Cape Breton Centre has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Transportation. Yesterday, the Minister of Community Services has told us about a most unfortunate event that we can all relate to. And thank goodness no one was injured. As well, the Minister said she will pay for the damage herself. But, Mr. Speaker, it's important the rules be examined in light of this incident and the one last year to clarify personal use of ministerial vehicles and their use by their families. These vehicles are meant to be used by the ministers and when they're carrying out government business, Mr. Speaker. So my question to this minister through you, will he make his cabinet colleagues aware of the actual rules and will make any necessary changes to assure Nova Scotian families that the ministerial cars their tax dollars are paying for will be used only to carry out government businesses?
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. I want to say that the Honourable Member, the Honourable Minister of Community Services, Mr. Speaker, came forward immediately with the information both to the police and to this government in regards to the situation. Mr. Speaker, I want to say that, like the Honourable Member said, my first concern was in regards to her family members, that they were safe, and I say, Mr. Speaker, we all agree on that. Mr. Speaker, we've undertaken this morning to begin a review of this whole policy in regards to use of not only ministerial vehicles, Mr. Speaker, but all those that are operated by any government employee. And, Mr. Speaker, we will do that review. We will do that review, Mr. Speaker, and as a result of that review, we will not only ensure that we have an up-to-date policy in regards to use of government vehicles, Mr. Speaker, but I will guarantee that and commit to this House that we will ensure that all government members and employees of this province fully understand that policy.
The Honourable the Member for Cape Breton Centre on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Community Service vehicle was damaged during personal use, as was the member from Cumberland North. In the end, they both chose to repair the vehicles on their own cost, which is good. However, yesterday, the Minister of Transportation said taxpayers would be on the hook for the cost of repairs. Today, we heard that she will now voluntarily pay for these repairs herself. The Minister of Transportation says her car was covered by the government self-insurance as long as a licensed driver was at the wheel. So through you, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Minister, in light of the confusing situation, will the Minister of Transportation ensure that all Cabinet Ministers are responsible for any damages suffered while using their vehicles for personal reasons?
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I did say yesterday that this would be a fully insurable accident, Mr. Speaker, is what I said. And the Honourable Minister actually has voluntarily made that decision on her own to pay for that damage. And Mr. Speaker, there's a difference between the government policy and the insurance policy. Some years ago, the government made a decision in regards to the premiums paid. I believe at the time was $1.4 million a year that the province was paying for insurance for government vehicles. And as a result of that, the government made a decision to self-insure up to $1 million a year. And I can tell the House, Mr. Speaker, that over the last number of years, we've saved in excess of $6 million as a result of that. Also, Mr. Speaker, each year, the average has been about $250,000 that the government would have paid in regards to those type issues. Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, the minister has made a decision on her own to come forward. This is a fully insured type of an accident, Mr. Speaker, that the policy would have covered. Mr. Speaker, and we have made a commitment that we will not only review the policy, but will ensure that all people in this province who operate a government leased or owned vehicle are well aware of that policy.
The Honourable the Member for Cape Breton Centre on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we know that these vehicles are self-insured, but before any average Nova Scotian family member is allowed behind the wheel of a motor vehicle in this province, the government requires that they be insured by a private insurer. So I'm through to you, to the Minister again. What steps will the Minister take to ensure that he, his colleagues and their families are covered by the same insurance before they use their vehicles for personal reasons?
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Again, Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, in checking with the risk manager for this province, this was a fully insured vehicle and accident, Mr. Speaker, that would have been covered by the insurance policy if, in fact, it was put in place. Mr. Speaker, we made a commitment, I made a commitment that we will not only review that, but ensure that all operators of vehicles in this province fully understand the policy, Mr. Speaker, and I would expect that the review of this policy will determine who can operate a government vehicle, when they can operate it, and where, Mr. Speaker. And when we do that, complete that review, I will make that review public to this House and to the members. Mr. Speaker, we will ensure that happens, Mr. Speaker, and I made a commitment here. We'll follow through on that, Mr. Speaker, when we make that happen. Thank you.
The Honourable the Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, my question today is for the Minister of Immigration. Mr. Speaker, when the government cancelled the failed business mentorship program in October '07, many nominees were completely overlooked. They are the very people who played by the rules and trusted the government of Nova Scotia to provide mentorship that was promised. The government failed these new Canadians and fumbled the nominee rebate by leaving out the early nominees who are committed to Nova Scotia and are still living here. Mr. Speaker, my question for the minister is, what is the government's plan for the nominees who went through the program, paid their money, and stayed here in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable, the Minister of Immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the honourable member is speaking about I think about a group that encompasses about 77 nominees in the program called NABEX. And we've had, as a department, I've had as a minister, several conversations with the representative of the NABEX group. I have made a commitment that once we have the Auditor General's report in our hands, Mr. Speaker, at that point in time, we will review the situation and get back to them at that time. Thank you.
The Honourable, the member for Halifax-Clayton Park on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it was the Liberal Party that called for the Auditor General's review of the Immigration Trust funds, and it should be remembered that those funds are 100% monies that come from the immigrants themselves, not Canadian or Nova Scotian tax dollars. There's enough money in those funds to treat all the business nominees fairly and consistently, unlike the current policy, which is discriminating against those who arrived early. The NABEX group is working as well as they can to consult and to engage in dialogue with the government, but in fact, some of their members are leaving and withdrawing as we stand here. And so the time is ticking, Mr. Speaker, for us to make a gesture to these newcomers before it's too late. My question to the minister is, will you acknowledge the legitimate concerns of the nominees that are excluded from your refund offer and make a statement of good faith that their concerns will be addressed?
The Honourable, the Minister of Immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I stated previously, I've had several meetings with representatives from the NABEX group, very good discussions with them. The honourable member, I guess, is, for one reason or another, is calling into question the Auditor General, and she admits herself that they called the Auditor General in the department. And Mr. Speaker, I have absolutely no intention of moving forward with any decision until we have the Auditor General's report. And I've made it very clear to the members from NABEX, once we have that report in their hands, we will then at that point have the information that we need to review the situation and get back to them.
The Honourable, the member for Halifax-Clayton Park on her final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, our province is being judged on how we treat these nominees, and so far the record isn't very good. The organization NABEX has a shrinking number of members because some of the people have no faith in the process that's underway. I have every faith in the Auditor General, but we don't need to wait to know that there's over $75 million in the account and that a gesture could be made today that says the money's there, or provided the money is there, we will do what is right and treat you fairly. My question to the minister is, will you make a commitment today that once the Auditor General confirms the money is in the immigration account, that you will immediately treat the nominees fairly and offer the same refund option to all nominees who are living in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable, the Minister of Immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't think there's any question that the Auditor General has to confirm what's in the account. I'll tell the House here right now. There are $68 million in the account, the nominee account, and there's approximately 1.9, almost $2 million in the contested account right now with regard to the lawsuit that's been put against the province. But, Mr. Speaker, until we have all of the information in our hands, until I have the Auditor General's report, I am not in any position, nor is this government in any position, to be able to make any commitment with regard to any group or individual. But I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, and I will say it here on the record, once I have the Auditor General's report in my hand and we have reviewed it, we will then make a decision with regard to our position of the 203 nominees that went through the program previously, and our decision with regard to action on their behalf. Thank you.
The Honourable, the member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question will be for the Minister of Agriculture.
In 2006 conservative election document, in the 2006 conservative election document, they promised that they would hire 10 new liaison officers for farmers. This was to replace 10 of the 100 experienced marketing, crop and livestock experts, technicians, and support staff, some with 31 years experience, that were cut by the Conservatives in April 2000, Mr. Speaker. During budget questioning last year with the acting minister, he stated they were going to hire 2 or 3 liaison officers in the summer of 2007. So far, no one's been hired by this department. So, Mr. Speaker, my question for the minister is, can he tell the Nova Scotia farmers why his government has broken another promise to the people of Nova Scotia?
The Honourable, the Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you much for the question. And Mr. Speaker, we are committed to meeting the extension needs of our agriculture industry. We will put in place new liaison officers to complement the existing extension resources. As I explained to the Honourable Member in budget estimates, in this fiscal year, if they should decide to support the budget, we will establish 7 new industry liaison officers and increase that number to 10 starting in the next fiscal year. Thank you.
The Honourable, the Member for Hants East on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sounds very much like the statement I got last year when nothing happened. Mr. Speaker, 2 years later and still not one industry liaison officer is hired. Another area lacking action is that of a plan for Nova Scotia's agricultural industry. We know that a joint working group started looking at the industry transition and renewal plan in September 2007, but to date this government hasn't come forward with a vision or a plan. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister is, can he indicate to this House the single most significant problem facing the agricultural industry today and what his solution for it is?
The Honourable, the Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for that question. Mr. Speaker, the agriculture sector in Nova Scotia is facing many, many challenges. The Honourable Member should know that. One of the challenges that the beef commodity, for example, face is the fact that they need better genetics in their herd, they need more branding, they need the support of Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member, I think, asked me what the single most challenge was that the agriculture community is facing, and that's really difficult to say because they face many, many challenges. And the NDP, I would think, with their expert researchers, would know that there's many, many challenges that the agriculture sector is facing. If you talk to the pork producers in the province of Nova Scotia, you'll find that for years they have faced high input costs relative to feed. If you talk to the beef sector, they would talk about better genetics. If you talk to supply management, they would talk, or pardon me, if you talk to the dairy industry, they would talk about supply management. If you talked about the fruit growers, they would talk about the need for orchard renewal. If you talked about horticulture, they also would ask for support. So there's many, many challenges that the agriculture community is facing, but this government on this side of the House is supporting agriculture, all the while coming in with our 7th straight balanced budget.
The Honourable, the Member for Hants East on his final supplement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, maybe I was wrong. I was thinking that the greatest challenge facing the agricultural industry today was their inability to get the price they need out of the value chain. But now I realize the greatest challenge they have is the minister that we have in this province, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the first step is coming up with a plan. The first step in coming up with a plan is to sit down with all industry stakeholders to hear them out on what they see as the problem, and then listen to their ideas on how the issues can be addressed. So my question to the minister, Mr. Speaker, is after 2 years at his post, why has he not sat down with all the industry reps to discuss the issues collectively?
The Honourable, the Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, the critic opposite, you know, he certainly has an interest in agriculture. I won't dispute that. But I have to say, as a proud product of a dairy farm in the Musquodoboit Valley, that in fact I stand by my word that there are many, many challenges facing the agriculture industry, and this government, while it does more than any government in Atlantic Canada, continues to meet with all the stakeholders, and will do that. And I'm proud to say that, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic on our first question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and my question's for the Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage. As the Minister knows, and as everybody else here knows, Nova Scotia's writers and its long history of storytelling have brought worldwide attention to the province. But the publishing industry itself faces huge and mounting challenges in this region, including the loss of 2 historic independent bookstores in the area, and the fact that the Federal Book Publishing Industry Development Fund has tossed a mere $600,000 in the direction of Atlantic publishers out of a total of $27 million spent across the province. My question to the Minister is, what is his government doing to offer support to our publishing sector?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Heritage and Culture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. Our heritage, our history of this province is very important to us, and we appreciate all authors who try to capture that, Mr. Speaker. And at the Department of Tourism, we're open to speak to publishers and to companies that like to enhance that, Mr. Speaker, and I hope that pleases the member across the way.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic on our first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it's important to do more than open in the case of books as in the case of governments, and being more than open to discussions. I'd like to quote an article from Atlantic Books today, and we'll table this article in which Dan Sakoop of Nimbus Publishing, one of the few remaining publishers, says that although there are a number of initiatives examining options in terms of better developing writers and marketing our books, what we really need is greater vision and leadership at all levels of government to allow for more funding from the public sector. My question to the Minister is, where is this government's commitment to ensure Nova Scotia's stories continue to get out?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, we take what the member brings up here today very seriously. We have involved ourselves in an initiative to work with our federal counterparts to make funds available to deal with such situation, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic on our final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I hope that concern is in fact taking place, because the word publishing doesn't appear anywhere in the Tourism, Culture and Heritage Department's current business plan. There is no mention of this industry anywhere, which is so important to preserving and promoting our heritage and culture and making it known, as the worldwide appetite for our stories does in fact prove. My question to the Minister is, will he commit that this government will do more than simply be open to discussions, and will do more than paying lip service to the publishing industry of Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Not only will I stand in the House today and speak of the importance of capturing our history of Nova Scotia and appreciating the authors of Nova Scotia, but, Mr. Speaker, I will forward... If her colleague would... Mr. Speaker, thank you. Not only will I commit to move on with the support of that initiative, but I will also forward information to the member of the support that we've already shown to the industry, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier would be familiar with the Rotary in Port Hastings near the Canso Causeway. This Rotary has been the scene of numerous accidents, especially truck rollovers. Last year, this Rotary was the location of a fatal accident, and recently another driver was killed as a result of a motor vehicle accident. My question to the Premier is, what plan does he and his government have to address the long-standing safety issues at the Rotary in Port Hastings?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member opposite for the question. Yes, Mr. Speaker, that very unfortunate incident and accident at the Rotary, Mr. Speaker. I can tell the honourable member in the House that every time there's an accident of this type, Mr. Speaker, in this province, there's not only a thorough investigation done by the police, but also our department would look at the at the signals, the type of things that are put in place in regards to national standards, Mr. Speaker, and I can tell you, the honourable member, that the Rotary meets all those, Mr. Speaker, in regards to safety for this province.
The Honourable Member for Richmond on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Rotary in Port Hastings is the gateway to Cape Breton Island. It provides drivers with the choice to take Highway 104, Highway 105, Route 19, or even stop at the Tourist Bureau. For visitors to Cape Breton, this can be very confusing. Mr. Speaker, the government and the minister has the accident statistics that clearly show the need to redesign this rotary, whether or not it meets safety standards. The statistics speak for themselves. So my question again to the Premier is, when can we expect the government to call tenders to address the long-standing safety issues at the Port Hastings Rotary?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Mr. Speaker, again, the honourable member, the honourable member would be aware. I would think that there is a long-range plan with this government, this department, in regards to not only the Rotary but the Port Hawkesbury bypass. We've done some preliminary work on that, Mr. Speaker, and we will have some announcement in the near future in regards to both those issues.
The Honourable Member for Richmond on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, another tourism season is about to begin. We expect that visitors will enjoy the experience once they arrive in Cape Breton Island. The safety issues at the Rotary are well known, and one life lost is one too many. Mr. Speaker, residents in the area know that the government has talked of a bypass, but the talk is that we're waiting till 2012 to see that take place. Mr. Speaker, again, the statistics speak for themselves. One life lost is one too many. Will the Premier today commit to call upon his Minister of Transportation to speed up and to immediately start the process of the bypass and changes at the Port Hastings Rotary?
The Honourable, the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
And again, to the honourable member opposite, I have made that commitment, Mr. Speaker. The department has been working actively on regards to that issue of not only the Rotary, but as well the Port Hawkesbury bypass. Mr. Speaker, we realize how important that is not only to Cape Breton Island, but to all of Nova Scotia. And we want to ensure that not only tourists who travel on our highways, Mr. Speaker, but local residents and business that drive on very safe highways as we presently have, Mr. Speaker. So again, Mr. Speaker, I will commit to the member opposite. The department is very actively working on a plan in regards to the Port Hawkesbury Rotary and the bypass and the Rotary, Mr. Speaker, and we'll have an announcement of that plan in the near future.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you today, Mr. Speaker, is to the Minister of Justice. In early March, the Minister released the first phase of his review into the use of tasers in this province. At that time, the Minister said very clearly the second and final stage of the review would be completed by the end of April. The end of April, Mr. Speaker, has come and gone. There is no sign of this important report on taser use in this province. So my question through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister is, can the Minister advise when the report will be made public?
The Honourable, the Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and indeed the honourable member is correct with regards to the anticipated completion date of that study. There was the advisory panel that was struck. They met once. They asked for 2 other meeting opportunities. Those meeting opportunities were granted. In fact, I do believe a meeting was being held today. It is my anticipation that during the course of this session that indeed the TASER panel report will be done and the recommendations brought forward for public disclosure and action.
The Honourable Member from Timberlea Prospect on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to bring to the Minister's attention an important document that I hope that it will be tabled by one of the pages and that he will bring to the attention of this group. Since the first phase of the report was presented in March, there have been significant developments on this issue of taser use. Last week, the Canadian Medical Association Journal reported, and I've just tabled that, or the page has just tabled that. The report says that tasers can affect the heart and therefore cause fatal heart problems. The study was conducted by 3 scientists from the University of Toronto. They concluded that additional research studies are needed to resolve conflicting findings to aid in the design of stun guns that won't affect the heart. My question to the Minister is, will the Department's ongoing review take into account the findings of the report published in the Canadian Medical Association Journal, which I've tabled today.
Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and to the honourable member with regards to any material that has been provided. As he knows, there's been many cross-jurisdictional, inter-Canadian initiatives with regards to the use of the taser device, and all the material that we've received here in Nova Scotia has been accumulative, that's been available as a resource pool, and I've just received a copy of this, and we'll bring a copy back to the officials looking at this. There's many aspects, and we're dealing with the policies and procedures and the governance outline here for Nova Scotia, so we will take that under consideration.
The Honourable, the member for Timberley Prospect on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, and I'll take the Minister at his word on that commitment. The first phase of his department's reports contain revelations that some have found startling. For example, the fact that in Halifax, taser use by police is 3 or 4 times more frequently on a per capita basis than Toronto. Halifax as compared to Toronto. In view of facts like this and the new findings reported by the Canadian Medical Journal, will he ask police forces to put a moratorium on taser use until additional research studies are conducted? A moratorium is needed now. The report says that, and that important step can be taken by the Minister at any time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I do appreciate the honourable member's concerns with regards to any of the research. That's why we've taken a very thoughtful process to go forward in that review. We've assembled an expert panel to deal with Nova Scotia's review of our matters here within this province, taking in other issues and circumstances in Canada, but at this time there is no intention to have a moratorium on use.
The Honourable, the member for Shelburne.
Mr. Speaker, through you to the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal, in December I asked you about getting community signs in place for the Shake Harbour Instant Society Museum. You said, and I quote, "There is a process in place to apply for community signs, and I will work the honourable member to see these signs get in place for his community," end of quote. My staff sent you the information. Nothing has happened. The whole thing's fallen into a black hole. Mr. Speaker, the museum's going to open again in June. People can't find it. He promised in this House that he would take it up with his department. It appears the Emperor has struck out. The Osprey Arts Centre in Shelburne needs signs too. They've got a great lineup this year, everything from J.P. Cormier to Opera Carmer.
Question.
But their tourist audience is going to be lost in space.
You have a question.
Mr. Speaker, will the Minister just ask Darth Vader or whoever runs the sign programs to get these signs in place?
The Honourable, the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal. The Honourable.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I don't think there's any need to rise in this House and insult employees of this province. They are very dedicated people who do a good job for us. Who do a good job for us each and every day of the year, Mr. Speaker. And I don't think it's fair to take advantage of the fact you can stand in this House and say what you want and not be taken to task for it. But I will tell the honourable member, Mr. Speaker, that after question period, I will contact the department and I'll get an update for the honourable member in regards to that issue he brought forward.
The Honourable, the member for Shelburne on his first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. The time allotted for oral question period has expired. The Honourable, the member for Waverley Fall River Beaver Bank on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to draw the attention of the House to the West Gallery. Seated in the West Gallery is a very, very dear friend of mine visiting from Ottawa who is here to participate in the World Old Timers Hockey Tournament. I played hockey with this gentleman back in the St. Mary's days, and he was probably one of the best defensemen that ever played hockey for St. Mary's Huskies, and he formed 1/3 of the sole line, the only all-black hockey line that played college hockey in North America. Bob Dawson, please stand up and receive a warm welcome, Bob.
The Honourable, the Deputy Government House Leader. The Honourable, the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would move that you now rise and we move into Committee of the Whole House on Supply.
The Honourable, the Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's an honour to rise today and have a few moments during today's proceedings to speak about the issues that are facing the residents in Cole Harbour and Eastern Passage and certainly across this province. Mr. Speaker, this is my first experience in the House with the budget proceedings, and I'm listening carefully, learning a lot, listen keenly to the debates that are going on. The discussions, the debates, the conversations that are happening affect so many Nova Scotians. That's what I've been elected to do, and I'm working hard at it. 6 months, Mr. Speaker, have gone by very quickly in the riding of Cole Harbour Eastern Passage. I'm having a great time. I'm working hard. It's challenging, but it's exciting at the same time. We're setting up our office. Residents are coming to the office. They're looking for help. We're able to achieve the goals often that they're looking for. In some cases, we're just giving them direction, but you all know that drill. Mr. Speaker, the differences in all of our ridings across Nova Scotia are there, but they're similar in so many ways. As the official opposition critic for Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations, this opportunity affords me opportunities to meet with many, many wonderful people across this province. I get to see and meet with former colleagues while I was on municipal council across the province and with UNSM.
The Honourable Member, would she allow an introduction?
Certainly.
Thank you. The Honourable, the Minister of Health Promotion and Protection.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to introduce to members of the House a visitor in the East Gallery. We have with us the mother of Kyle McIsaac, who was the star of the MLA's hockey team. If she would rise, Mary-Ann McIsaac. And receive the warm welcome of the House, Mr. Speaker. She also happens to be the wife of the Minister of Economic Development, Mr. Speaker.
It certainly is a pretty shade of red. The Honourable, the Member for... I'm sorry. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask the host today to welcome students from École de Carrefour from Dartmouth East, and they've been here during question period, and I hope they enjoyed the time. Thank you.
I want to thank the Honourable Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage, and we'll be adding 2 minutes to her time.
I was speaking about the opportunities that being the critic for Municipal Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations Service Nova Scotia, that it offers an opportunity to become reacquainted with former colleagues and certainly those that are involved heavily with UNSM. I'd like to take this opportunity, if you will, Mr. Speaker, to again thank the Leader of the Official Opposition and my colleagues in caucus for their support as I make my way through this first year. And putting their support and helping me put my best foot forward is very much appreciated. That ongoing effort is clearly there, whether for all constituents of the riding of Cole Harbour and Eastern Passage, whether they voted for me or not. That's what I was elected to do, and that's what I will do. But to do this, Mr. Speaker, I have to stay connected. I have to stay connected at a local level, connected to the many committed, hard-working, devoted residents of Cole Harbour and Eastern Passage. From the very young, Mr. Speaker, the community is engaged. The very young are collecting their pennies for those that are less fortunate in the daycares and in the preschools and in the lower elementary grades. To our more senior residents, Mr. Speaker, sharing their experiences with students in the schools. No doubt the visitors today have had the opportunity to speak to the elders in their communities, and it's an important part. It's an important part of the growth for all of the young people in our communities, and I'm pleased to say that our seniors in the riding of Cole Harbour Eastern Passage are doing just that. I'll be speaking about some of those details a little bit further, but Mr. Speaker, I will do that because I want every member in this legislature to understand who they are affecting with every debate, with every discussion, with every decision that is held in and outside of this chamber. The first story I want to share is about an event that happened recently in our community of Eastern Passage. And it's funny that I should get that today, that I bring this forward today, on the same day we receive a letter from the Leave Out Violence organization, the LOVE organization. And you'll understand how I connect the two, particularly where they're talking about just showing some love, an event that they're planning. Mr. Speaker, the story I'm going to tell you actually has a very sad beginning, a tragic beginning, in fact, but it's a story worth telling. So many times we hear in our communities, we read in the newspaper, we hear on the radio negative coverage about